And our first speaker is a former MI5 intelligence officer who left the service at the same time as David Shayler, her partner at the time, to help him blow the whistle about alleged criminality within the intelligence agencies. By doing this, they had to give up their careers, go on the run across Europe, August 1997, living hiding for a year, and then spend the next 2 years in exile in Paris. She published her first book, Spies, Lies and Whistleblowers, MI5, MI6, and to Shayla Affair. I'm really thrilled we're going to listen to her for the keynote. Please give her a very warm welcome, Annie Machon.
Well, thank you, Fareed, for that very warm welcome, and thank you to the organisers for pulling together what I think is probably a unique event, at least in my experience, where we can support and protect whistleblowers and also bring together the vital communities that can help them live their lives and survive the process. So I hope we find a great deal of common ground today, and we can evolve new methods to protect the whistleblowers because they need it. They are indeed, in this mad modern world of ours, the regulators of last resort. To start with, though, I just want to update a very old and very favourite poem of mine. Many of you will probably be aware of the poem by Pastor Martin Niemöller about Germany's slide into fascism and totalitarianism in the 1930s. But I think it needs an update. So I want to start with this. First, they came for the Muslims after 9/11, but I was not a Muslim, so I did not speak up. Then they came for the domestic extremists, but I was not a hacktivist, so I did not speak up. Then they came for the whistleblowers, but I was not a whistleblower, so I did not speak up. Then they came for the journalists and the lawyers, but I was neither of those, so I did not speak up. And when they came for me, there was nobody left to speak up for me. And I think that this is the situation we are now in. And this is why it's great to have all these different communities come together to learn and provide support and develop tools to protect all of us in this mad, post-Snowden, panoptic and surveillance world where all our rights across the planet are being eroded. And as I said, whistleblowers are indeed the last resort, one of the last chances we have to push back against this developing totalitarian system. And this is what we're here to celebrate. I've had so many years of experience in this field and had the pleasure of working and trying to support so many whistleblowers from so many fields that I can see very clearly the pressures and the trajectory that they all have to go through. Of course, most whistleblowers come out of fields such as health or finance or industry, and they face appalling consequences for the courage of their actions. Usually they will be sacked, or they'll be moved sideways, or they will be gagged. They will lose their professional status, their very means of earning a living and paying the mortgage. Often the stress of years of trying to fight for the truth to come out will also put an incredible strain on their relationships and their families, and they risk losing that too. And this is terrible, and there are certain provisions in many European countries to try and protect these sort of whistleblowers. But I've seen again, time and time again, that these provisions are not strong enough and that they can be played and gamed by the employers. However, of course, in the year after Edward Snowden came forward, everyone is also very aware of the high-level whistleblowers coming out of central government and the military and intelligence. And they risk all that too. But then, of course, they also risk spending the rest of their lives in prison. We've seen this with poor Chelsea Manning. We've seen the WikiLeaks publishing outfit being stymied, and Julian Assange is now locked up in the Ecuadorian embassy. We've seen a whole range of other intelligence whistleblowers emerge from that environment in America and face prison. So, for example, Thomas Drake, another NSA whistleblower, went through all the approved channels, and yet he was still threatened with 35 years in prison. We currently have a former CIA officer, John Kiriakou, serving 3 years in prison for exposing the fact that the CIA uses a torture program. And yet have the torturers been imprisoned? No. So this is what we're seeing time and time again. And in fact, I did have some personal experience of this, as was mentioned in the introduction, where in the 1990s, and this is going way back to the analog era, I worked for MI5 with David Shayler. We were there for 6 years, and this was probably the only marginally golden ethical era of the UK spy's 100 years existence. Because for the first time in 1989, they had been put on a legal footing. They were now expected to obey the law. And this, of course, was pre-9/11, when the intelligence gloves came off. And yet in that time, despite the fact that they were working within the law, supposedly, and despite the fact that we only worked there for 6 years, we saw so many things going wrong that we felt compelled to go public and to blow the whistle about this series of crimes. And it was sort of incremental. There were a whole range of different things that we had concerns about, starting off with files held on our government ministers by the spy agencies, the very ministers who are supposed to be the political masters of those spy agencies, by the way. We saw illegal telephone taps on journalists. No change there. We saw innocent people being put in prison because MI5 decided to withhold vital evidence during their trials. We saw bombs that could and should have been prevented on UK streets being planted by the Provisional IRA. And MI5 could have stopped them, but they didn't. They made mistakes. And then, crucially, they lied to government to cover up their mistakes. And then the final straw that broke the camel's back, the case that made us quit, was MI6, our international intelligence agencies, funding an Islamic extremist group in Libya in 1996 to try and assassinate Colonel Gaddafi. Now, this operation was illegal under UK law. It was reckless, it was immoral, and it went wrong, crucially, in 1996, because Colonel Gaddafi survived to be assassinated another day by the very same groups. But we hadn't signed up to the British intelligence community to become involved in what was essentially state-sponsored terrorism. So this is why we resigned and we blew the whistle. Now, this had consequences, of course. We knew the law in the UK. There is something called the Official Secrets Act that makes it a crime to speak to anyone outside your own agency about what you've witnessed there. And if you break that law, you go across that clear, bright line, you are the one risking prison. Now, in those days, and to this day in the UK, you only risk 2 years in prison, but that's bad enough. It's not like 35 years in prison, as the Americans are doing in their war on whistleblowers. But realising that we did risk going to prison, we decided to go preemptively on the run before the story broke in the British media. Literally 12 hours ahead of the newspapers hitting the street, we flew out, and indeed we flew to Amsterdam, strangely enough, a good refuge for whistleblowers, before going on the run for a month around Europe, and then having to live in hiding for a year in a very remote farmhouse in France, and face arrest. I was arrested, friends and family were arrested around us, student activists who supported us were arrested, and indeed many journalists were arrested and threatened with prosecution for daring to report our disclosures. In fact, some of them were convicted. So the ripples went out and out and out. And David Shayler, the key whistleblower, went to prison, not once but twice. First of all, when the British failed to extradite him from Paris in 1998. And secondly, after he had returned voluntarily in the year 2000 to stand trial, to face the music, as the Americans are now demanding Edward Snowden should do. And of course, he went through a rigged trial. And of course, he was found guilty. And of course, he went back to prison. So that was a very high price to pay for exposing the crimes of others. And those others have never to this day been interviewed or arrested or charged or convicted. And I see this time and time again with whistleblowers, that they will be victimised. And it's really a way of how can we protect them, particularly now, because, as I mentioned before, in the revelations from Edward Snowden, we know now that we are all living under the baleful surveillance glare of the NSA, the GCHQ, and all the other alphabet soup agencies across Europe. All our countries are affected. And this has implications not just for our very democracy, and that is very fundamental as well, because if we do not have privacy in our communications, we do not have a sense that we can read and write and watch things on the internet and plan things and have relationships on the internet in privacy, then we start to self-censor. We no longer can be fully active and fully participatory citizens within our countries. And that is indeed the beginning of the slide towards a totalitarian regime. It's a bit like the book burnings in Nazi Germany, where you can't read certain material, you can't write certain material, you have the presses smashed up. And I know what it's like to live without privacy as well, because during the whistleblower years, of course, we were being investigated. Of course, our homes were bugged. Of course, our communications were bugged. Some of our friends were turned against us and made to report back on us. So we felt we had no privacy whatsoever. And I can tell you it is a very, very corrosive feeling to live under. But now, of course, thanks to Edward Snowden, we all live like that, not just the whistleblowers. So there are various ways we can try and push back against this sort of system. As I said, whistleblowers are the last regulators of last resort, and we need to ensure their survival. We need to ensure that they are protected. We need to ensure that they can go on to live full and productive and happy lives rather than being destroyed. And what we see time and time again is the authorities pushing back so hard and so fast just to crush individual whistleblowers, to deter future whistleblowers. Now, I don't think this is working so well for them anymore, because even as Chelsea Manning's trial started last year, even as she was facing 35 years to life in prison for exposing the war crimes of the US, at that very time, another young whistleblower was coming forward, Edward Snowden. And I think with help and with increased technical capabilities and protections, we can encourage more to come out as well. And I think that is crucial. So what are the sort of areas that we can help with? I'm aware we have whistleblowers in the audience. I'm also aware we have journalists and lawyers and activists and technologists. And I think this is a fabulous chance to bring all these people together to cross-pollinate what we need to do. So just looking at some of these aspects, from my experience, I can see very clearly how the mainstream media can be played, can be controlled by the government and intelligence spin masters. And in the UK particularly, they are past masters at this. We have a situation where the mainstream media is controlled both by soft power and hard power. The soft power is when the spies or government spin people approach journalists and say, come and help us, we'll give you stories, we will give you scoops and news, and you'll get the headlines you crave. And the journalists can be welcomed into this charm circle, this secret circle. It's very seductive for journalists. And then they become dependent, shall we say. They become news junkies, dependent on the information coming out of these very secretive, very centralised organisations. Then, of course, the pressure can be ramped up on them. Well, we've been helping you, now can you help us? If you hear of a story that your media outlet might be working on that might be damaging to us, just tip us off. We can stop it, we can spike it, we can censor it. And then, of course, we see the linkages going up the chain of command, where editors and senior spies get together, where proprietors of media organisations and top spies get together and wine and dine each other, where they can say over a long lunch with a very good claret, oh, you don't want to talk about that whistleblower's stories. He's a fantasist. She's got grievances. They're too junior to know what they're talking about. They were sacked. All these slurs are used repeatedly. And it's very easy for this high-level interaction to then trickle down a media organisation and spike a worthwhile and terribly important story. And this isn't just with the spies. I mean, we've seen this as well with the News International phone hacking scandal in the UK, where celebrities were having their phone messages being hacked by journalists. And the collusion went all the way to the top between Rupert Murdoch and the UK government, between the editors and the UK government, and the top police. So this goes on time and time again, and that's just the soft power to control the media. Then in the UK particularly, we have a whole battery of laws that can be used to stifle and spike stories. So there are injunctions, and there are super injunctions where the media can't even say that they've been gagged. There are government versions of that, PIIs. There are libel laws, and we've been the centre of libel tourism for many, many years in the UK. There are counter-terrorism laws, which can be used to stop the legitimate work of journalists, and have been used to stop that work. And, of course, in the UK, our secrecy laws can be used against the media to stop it doing its job. So the Official Secrets Act, that not just imprisons whistleblowers, can also be used against journalists. So if a journalist covers a story protected by the Official Secrets Act, they too will face 2 years in prison. Now, this is even more draconian than Russia, where the Russian secrecy laws say that whistleblowers, sure, will be prosecuted and go to prison, but the journalists are officially protected. Well, that's the theory. Of course, then they run the risk of being shot on their doorstep, but that's a whole different story. So there's all these powers to control the mainstream media. And this is why I think more and more whistleblowers are now looking at other platforms. And this is why when I first heard about the WikiLeaks model a few years ago, my initial response was, fabulous. This gets away from all these potential blockages that can be shoved onto and imposed onto the mainstream media. And indeed, that is the case. And I'm so pleased to see other leak-type platforms being developed and being used in order to make sure that whistleblowers will no longer be stifled. And I think that's one of the things that really needs to be developed further, as far and as fast as we can take it, because it is so important to have this free flow of information for a healthy democracy. But it's not just whistleblowers who get victimised either. I mean, lawyers now need to think along these terms. Because I've known for years, I mean, one of the things that we blew the whistle on was the fact that the concept of legal privilege in the UK doesn't exist. There are some very famous human rights lawyers, particularly a wonderful woman called Gareth Pearce, who takes on all the most difficult cases, including ours. And she was bugged when she was going in to see her clients at top security prisons. And there have been other cases where MPs or other lawyers go into prisons to meet their clients, and bugs have been found under the tables. And this is all legal, because if the prison gives permission for their property to be bugged, then that's fine, it can be done. So this idea, even pre the surveillance of the internet, pre the endemic interception of our communications, even then, privilege did not exist. But now, of course, if you are a lawyer and you have sensitive clients coming through to you saying, I've got all this evidence of wrongdoing, I want to expose it, what would be the risks I'm going to take? Can you give me legal advice up front? Then even that, of course, can be intercepted and can be used both against the whistleblower and potentially the lawyer. And we've seen them being interfered with in the real world too. I mean, Jennifer Robinson, the lawyer, one of the lawyers for Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, was put on a no-fly list when she was trying to go home to her native country, Australia, a few years ago. And more recently, Jessalyn Radak runs the Government Accountability Project in the US to help so many whistleblowers coming forward. And she has had to adopt Cold War spy tactics to protect them. But she flew into the UK only a few months ago and was pulled aside at immigration and given the nth degree of security checks. She was stopped and she was questioned about why she was entering the UK. Well, she was coming through for an award ceremony. So this was overt pressure. This is to show the lawyers that they are being watched and people know what they're up to, and to try and pressurize them and scare them. So what can they do? For journalists who want to work with high-end whistleblowers, for lawyers who need to give them advice, to be able to speak freely, we need decent security. And this seems like an impossibility now. Every time we hear some new horror emerging from the Snowden disclosures about the sheer scale, depth and breadth of the interception technologies that are now available to the spies. And it's not just about they can find stuff through social networks. It's not just about the fact that GCHQ can mainline off the fibre optic cables coming in from America, between America and Europe. It's not just all the other software hacks and bugs and intercepts that they can use. As we heard at the CCC in Hamburg after Christmas, they also now are bugging the hardware of new computers, new phones that are being made. And in fact, I think there was even one story where they were using remotely microwaves to bounce off our computer screens and read what we're writing from a remote distance, or something like that. So we're in this dystopia. You can be as safe as you want with your software. You can be as protective as you want to be, as you can try to be, even with your hardware, but they will find ways around it. So yes, work with the geek community, because I have faith in them that they can fast and quickly technologically outpace the lumbering might of our spy agencies quite often. I have faith that they can indeed help save the world, help save journalists, help save lawyers, and help save whistleblowers. But the other aspect I would suggest to all of you across all these communities is to think back to the old Cold War spy type methodologies that you can use to meet a source securely. So I think there is a tendency within certainly the high-end geek community to have an over-reliance on their skills with technology. I think there also needs to be an awareness of meeting person to person, of running your whistleblower as perhaps MI5 or MI6 would have run their intelligence asset a couple of decades ago in Russia. You have to be ultra security conscious. So, for example, you meet in cash-paid hotel rooms, a different one every time. You have burner phones that you only use for each other. You might even have burner notebooks where you can email only each other. You always set up the future meetings at the existing one, so you don't have to communicate where you're going to be. There is no chance that your location can be bugged ahead of the meeting. You don't speak around your workspace at work if you're a journalist or a lawyer, because there might be a bug in your computer. You never use your regular hardware to communicate with your whistleblower. You don't speak in your home. You don't speak in your car. And you are aware, even if you go and sit on a park bench with a bit of chalk on the marking it and things, even there you can be picked up. So it's sort of getting into this mentality, and all I can suggest is I'm very happy to help with some of that sort of old school spy stuff. Otherwise, I seriously recommend reading John le Carré and Len Dayton. You'll get a lot of useful hints. So I think we need to think about all these sort of aspects and see security of whistleblowers and the protection of whistleblowers in a sort of holistic way, the holistic round. Because in this world, what are we looking at the moment? Not just the interception of all our communications, with the copyright wars and the pressure from mega corporations, the corporatists, on our national governments and international institutions to pull together international draft treaties, undemocratic treaties that our representatives can't even read before they are forced to sign, giving away all our citizens' rights. Under some of these treaties, these copyright wars, we are seeing this control of the information that we are allowed to send, as well as the control of the reading of what we do send. So at the moment, this sort of dual pressure from state surveillance, international state surveillance, and international corporatist interests, re-copyright, is getting our freedom to communicate in this ghastly pincer movement. And that is what we have to work around. So we're in a world of dystopic surveillance. We are also in a world, of course, post 9/11, where international law is flouted, ignored, where Tony Blair, our lovely ex-Prime Minister and the Middle East peace envoy, can now call for yet more military invasions in Iraq and Syria and places like that, where we have all our civil liberties stripped away in all of our countries, and where we have torture routinely, and extradition, which of course is kidnapping by any other name, where people can be snatched off the streets across Europe and taken off to black prisons. And we have CIA presidentially approved kill lists, which are lists drawn up every week based on vague intelligence. And the president signs this every week on a Tuesday morning. And once your name is on that list and it has been signed, you can be assassinated by drone strike or other means anywhere in the world. So we are living in difficult times. We are living in something that George Orwell could not even begin to envisage in his worst imaginings when he was writing 1984. But we are also living in times where there is hope, I think, where with the awareness that brave whistleblowers bring to us about what we are facing, it gives us a fighting chance to push back, to develop tools to protect our privacy, to protect our democracies, to protect our very ways of life, a chance to draw a line in the sand, draw a halt to this rapid slide towards totalitarianism. We are now looking at the new fascism, if you use Benito Mussolini's old definition, which was the merger of the corporate and the state. And I think what Edward Snowden laid bare last year is quite how far that process has gone. We are living under a global fascism. So his disclosures and the disclosures of so many other whistleblowers have given us a fighting chance. We know what we're up against, and we can take steps to do that. But of course, we need to remember it is the whistleblowers who pay the highest price in this process. Journalists may be targeted. Some of them may be imprisoned, like Barrett Brown or David Miranda, Glenn Greenwald's partner, who was stopped when he was trying to go through London Heathrow last year. But they're very rarely persecuted to the same degree as the whistleblower. Similarly with the lawyers, there are certain degrees of protection. They might not always hold now. You can't take them for granted. But it is the whistleblower that will pay the highest price. And indeed, some whistleblowers coming out of the States have been threatened with having to pay the ultimate price. Remember the calls from some US politicians to assassinate Snowden, assassinate Manning. So I want to welcome you all here. I'm so excited to have the opportunity to see all these different groups come together, and let's create something great. Let's take this forward, create platforms, create support networks for the whistleblowers to give them a fighting chance during the process, and also a chance to see that there is life after the process, that having stood up and followed their consciences, they have risked a lot, but they will survive. And they will have made the world a better place. So welcome, everybody. Thank you.